All right, moments ago, Hillary Clinton spoke exclusively to our Christian Amanpour, addressing the ceremonial swearing in of Brett Kavanaugh at the White House last night. Listen to this.
What was done last night in the White House was a political rally. It further undermined the image and integrity of the court. And that troubles me greatly. It saddens me because our judicial system has been viewed as one of the main pillars of our constitutional government. So I don't know how people are going to react to it. I think given our divides, it will pretty much fall predictably between those who are for and those who are against. But the president's been true to form. He has insulted, attacked, demeaned women throughout the campaign, really for many years leading up to the campaign, and he's continued to do that inside the White House.
All right, joining us now to talk about this and so much more, we have David Gregory, a CNN political analyst, of course, Jeffrey Toobin, CNN chief legal analyst. Of course, and former federal prosecutor, duh, and CNN White House correspondent Abby Phillip. No introduction necessary for Abby. Okay, so, Jeffrey, is Hillary Clinton right that what we saw last night, that President Trump, of course, turned political and went, into full insult mode against Democrats, does it undermine the Supreme Court?
Well, I think the Supreme Court has a reputation for being less political than it always has been. If you go through all of American history, it has always been at the fulcrum of American politics. There has been an effort over many years to try to insulate the court, and it is different. They don't run for office the way other politicians do, the way politicians do. But the Hillary Clinton is right that he treated this as another way to appeal to his base. I mean, this remarkable national apology to Brett Kavanaugh was really something deeply astonishing. And the claim that he was found innocent by the Senate was so preposterously untrue, but it's in keeping with how Donald Trump has run his presidency and his life.
And Abby, it was deliberate. I mean, that goes without saying. He walked into that room for that ceremony deliberately to stoke those flames. Why do people in the White House choose to do this?
Yeah, I mean, John, this is the president again saying the quiet part loud. He's been talking for days now about the fact that he thinks this is going to help them in November. He says something's going to happen. By that, he means this is going to boost his supporters. But what I thought was the most striking about last night was how the president was on a different page from his own nominee. Brett Kavanaugh is the person who's going to be on the court and understands that he needs to do something to to turn the page, to change the chapter. And he was trying to do that in his speech, and President Trump did the exact opposite by making this as political as it could possibly have been. That's to be expected, though. I think Hillary Clinton was right in some ways that where we are right now in this country is that when the president does things like that, people are no longer surprised by it. They acknowledge it as just being what he does. He is not someone who typically will fall back to what we have come to believe are norms of recent history, maybe not norms of the history of the court altogether. And President Trump's not bothered by that. He's concerned about November 6th, and that's what he said last night. And I think that is where the White House is coming from with this. This was their chance to take a victory lap, and he was not going to let that opportunity pass him by.
But go ahead. I have a question for you, David. I mean, and then you can answer the whole thing. How can Brett Kavanaugh effectively turn the page? Because how can he paint himself differently than that person that everyone saw at the second hearing that was so hyper-partisan, was going after the Clintons or blaming the Clintons for what had happened to him with being accused of sexual assault? He was so overwrought. I understand why he would want to turn the page, but how can he convince people who do not support him that he is not a partisan?
I think it's a long game and it's a long path. And I thought what was striking about the ceremony at the White House last night, among the things that was striking, is that the president was very much using this as a campaign event. And Justice Kavanaugh had a very different agenda. I think he understood that, he had to be there and go along with it, and his remarks had a lot in it, turning to President Trump and saying thank you for everything, knowing the president expected that amount of loyalty, while also trying to signal to the rest of the country that all of this is now done, and he's going to focus on being an effective justice who's not bitter. He chose those words carefully, and is going to try to be big and try to help the institution. I think this is going to be a longer-term issue for Justice Kavanaugh, who will probably not want to retreat and be a recluse. And will want to rehabilitate himself over time to the extent that he can. But I do think the larger politics, look, I'm sure that at the White House and in Mitch McConnell's office, they'll be really keen to evaluate Hillary Clinton's analysis after they jot off a quick thank you note to her for weighing in on this, because that only is going to help them. I mean, if Hillary Clinton had done more to fire up her base, perhaps Democrats wouldn't be in this position where they were looking at Justice Kavanaugh. So that's the political truth. And now Republicans recognize that in the Kavanaugh, the contentious Kavanaugh hearing and its aftermath, they're looking in those states that will decide the Senate, realizing that public opinion is on their side. That's who President Trump was playing to. That's who Republicans are playing to. And they're not going to be have their minds changed by Hillary Clinton weighing in.
There's some evidence that what the president has done the last few weeks, or the events of the last few weeks, have helped the president. His approval rating is up five points since September right now, and it stands at 41%. That is still historically quite low, but 41% is a lot better than 36%. There may be different reasons for this. It might be people approve of the way he handled the Kavanaugh thing. It might be Republicans coming home. It might be the fact that he hasn't been in the news all that much, which always seems to help him. The more he's in the news, the worse off he tends to do, Jeffrey. But something that is just glaring is the gender gap now in the job approval, which is just striking. If you look at the difference between men and women, women's down to 31%. 31% approval rating for the president. Men at 51%, and men noticeably higher than it was in September.
One of the great mysteries about the midterms is how much the women's vote will differ from the men's vote, and how much it will help the Democrats. One of the cliches about this election in advance has been that college-educated women in particular, have abandoned the Republican Party and Donald Trump in vast, great numbers. Allow me a bit of skepticism. These polls, how much of this is noise from one month to the next? I'm not really sure. I've learned from Harry Enton and others who you're going to be talking to shortly that, one poll you don't want to put too much stock in. But, the Kavanaugh hearings were obviously a major moment in American history. And, I think it is quite clear that the Anita Hill hearings in 1991 had a big political effect a year later, the so-called Year of the Woman. Many women were elected to the Senate. Whether that follows, the Kavanaugh hearings, women rebelling against the Republican Party, count me as undecided. I just don't. I'm out of the prediction business, and I think we all ought to be very humble about predicting how this turns out.
Can I just say, too, we also know how women's views of Republicans, namely the head of the Republican Party, President Trump, which way that was going. So the question is, how much more enthusiasm, how much more anger will there be after Kavanaugh? And there is another side to it. You asked before about rehabilitating Kavanaugh's image. There are plenty of people, Republicans, who think he got a raw deal. And I think a lot of the gender gap, you also have a bigger partisan gap on that. So it is Republican women versus Democratic women in terms of how they view this. So that's why I'm with Jeffrey. I don't know how we're going to see that play out when there's certainly more enthusiasm on the right as well.
Go ahead, Abby.
It's also about where we're talking. I mean, if you are a Republican running in a moderate district in the suburbs, you are in trouble, regardless of all of this, but even more so now because that's where the gender gap is really showing up. But if you are a red state Democrat in North Dakota or in West Virginia, you might also be in trouble because that's where the anger on the Republican side is. That's where they can most benefit from an enthusiasm boost as as a result of this. I do think the gender gap will matter, but it will matter in the places where Republicans are already facing some serious headwinds. The suburban women, suburban districts, purple districts, districts that have long been drifting toward the Democrats. Even in the 2016 election, maybe it was not enough to change the ultimate dynamics and the result of that race, but it will matter in the House of Representatives. And I think that's kind of why there ought to be some uncertainty about whether the women vote is going to result in Democratic control of all of Congress, because it may not. It may actually result in a split chamber because of the really divergent dynamics in Congress right now.
And so, Abby, quickly, then how is the calculation in the White House behind you there playing out with women? When the president says this was a hoax perpetrated by Democrats, women hear that, many women, certainly on the Democratic side, as he doesn't believe Christine Blasey Ford. He doesn't believe Debbie Ramirez. He doesn't believe accusers of sexual assault. And so has the president decided that that's the strategy that he's going to go and ignore what you're talking about in terms of women being pivotal?
I think he's speaking to a different group of women. He's speaking to the women who he says are worried about their sons, who are worried about their husbands, worried about their brothers, and so on and so forth. The question is, how large of a group of those women is that? And also, where are they? And are they going to matter more on the Republican side? I think the president is gambling that those people matter more on his side of the ledger, that's his base. And I think this is a White House that's looking at the Senate being the most important place for them to try to hold on to power, because if they can hold on to one chamber, it will make their lives a little bit easier for the next 2 years. And I think, ask any Republican in town, the House is not in a good place for Republicans. The Senate, it's a coin toss. It's a 50-50 coin toss. And President Trump knows that he needs to energize his base in order to hold on to some of these seats that have been slipping away. Tennessee, Texas, North Dakota, even West Virginia. Now they're in a place where they have someone in West Virginia who's sided with them on a key issue. They're feeling pretty good about that, and I think that's where they're putting all their coins right now. But
it's not entirely political calculation on the president's part. I think when you think about Donald Trump, you always have to think about the fable of the scorpion and the frog. It's his nature. I mean, he doesn't believe women who accuse men of sexual harassment and assault.
Or he doesn't want to.
He just doesn't. Well, right. I mean, he never believes women, whether it's Roy Moore or Bill O'Reilly or Roger Ailes or Donald Trump being accused. I mean, so yes, it's a measure of political calculation, but I think it's also who he is.
John, Jeffrey, David, Abby, thank you very much. We didn't even get to talk about Kanye West, which I know David is itching to talk about. Kanye West. Lunch at the White House on Thursday. Okay, thank you all. Along those lines, we just talked about it. We didn't dissect it. We didn't give it the time that it really deserves. It's a major political moment.
I feel like we just pulled the football away from David Gregory a little bit. Like, he was like, yeah, come on. We were like, and thank you, David Gregory.
He's got an entire entire Kanye West podcast that he's going to smoke at some point later on. All right, along those lines, the president says he now likes her music